And this hearing will be something the Oxford community will never forget. There's been a lot of new evidence and testimony and arguments from both the prosecutors and defense attorneys.
And since the start of the hearing, we've been joined by a legal panel to help us break down everything that's happening in that process. And the discussion continues right now with Richard Convertino and Lillian Diallo. Thank you both for being here with us. You've been here with us since this morning. A lot happening today. Lillian, how are you feeling?
I feel there's no word. I cannot put into words the feelings, right? When you see Buckmeyer, when you hear and you listen to his words, if that doesn't move you to understand as a community, as a society, as a country, we can only take care of this country right now. What can we do to make it better for the next day, the next generation? It's very tough. It's a very emotional thing, right? And it's trained out of defense attorneys, right? Especially if you do capital work, just like it's trained out of homicide detectives. But you saw that homicide detective day one, the emotion. This is not easy for anybody.
And Richard, do you think the Miller hearing did it serve its purpose in this case, do you think?
I think it absolutely did. I think the prosecution was excellent in the way it was presented. I think that Ms. McDonald and her staff rebutted the presumption under the Michigan Compiled Law 769, which says that the rebuttable presumption is that the defendant shall not be sentenced to life in prison without parole. I think they overcame their burden. They fulfilled their task, and I think that ultimately this is a defendant, if there ever was a defendant who deserved life without parole, this is the case.
Why do you say that?
Well, I listened to the testimony, and I believe that all of the factors in Miller v. Alabama, the United States Supreme Court case, I believe they were met by clear and convincing evidence by the prosecution, and the presentation of the evidence, I think, overcame the presumption. And I mean, I listened, I took notes during the closing argument of Ms. McDonald, and she ticked off all of, or some of the reasons why it was a planned scheme and artifice by this defendant, and not just a temporary or transient moment of immaturity, as the courts have said. She said clearly that he had gotten a more powerful weapon, not the weapon that he initially had. He had an execution of his plan, which he carried out to the fullest. He had protection in his ears. He knew that his ears might be damaged by the gunfire. He researched the police reaction times. He researched juveniles in prison. He was calm and collected when he fired 32 shots throughout the school, striking more than 11 people. He talked about killing babies in his journal with great detail, very troubling and disturbing. He planned to stay alive. That was a key part of her closing argument, that he in fact realized the consequences of the action and planned to stay alive after after the shooting, and he gave himself up almost immediately to a school resource officer. So I think she did a masterly job at laying out the evidence, and I think the judge will be convinced that they met their burden.
There are so many things about this case in particular that make it different from so many others that we've seen. One of them being that he has admitted his guilt. We know he's guilty. That's something that you've brought up several times, Lillian.
So yeah, there's no doubt that he's guilty, right? And listen, I am not trying to tell anybody or sway anybody, right? Whatever the judge decides, that's what the judge decides, right? I'm not going to say clear and convincing, not. I just know this. Prosecutor McDonald laid it out in the closing summation in a form in which I could follow, and as a defense attorney and as a human, I'm there with Prosecutor McDonald, right? And then let's talk about the more powerful weapon. We cannot escape the fact he could not have bought that weapon himself. That weapon was bought for him by a parent. You cannot escape that. So he didn't go get a more powerful weapon. The parents gave him access to a more powerful weapon. Is it an atrocity? Is it heinous? Is it all the things you want to say? Absolutely, right? But at the end of the day, Buckmere.
His
One of
words
the
were really
things that's different than this case, I think, than other cases where juveniles are sentenced to life without parole is in this case, the atrocities were, so much bigger. In the case of Taylor, People v. Taylor, which is a Michigan case, that was a case, it was where carjacking occurred. They took a man at gunpoint, took him out after they emptied his ATM. They took him to a house in Detroit, shot him in the back of the head, and then burned the house. Those were the facts of that case. That one defendant did not do the shooting. He was 16 and a half at the time, and he was sentenced to life without parole. Here, the crime is so much more heinous. You have 4 dead, innocent young people, 2 of them 14 years old, 7 that were seriously wounded in this fiasco. And so, by the way, the United States is the only country in the world that sentences juveniles to life without parole. And it was the only country in the world that sentenced juveniles to death until Roper Roper v. Simmons in 2005. And prior to that, from 1976 to 2005, 22 juveniles were put to death. 22 juveniles were put to death between 76 and 2005. So we're the only country that does this. But that is the law here in Michigan, and following the law, I think the prosecution did meet their burden, and I do think that this is a case where this young man should be sentenced to life without parole.
Lillian, how do you feel? Because you've been with us throughout this entire hearing. You've been providing analysis in studio, and you described it as a roller coaster.
It is. It's a roller coaster, right? I don't have the arrogance of positioning to even be able to tell somebody, this is what you must do. You reach that decision when you do, right? You based on everything that you've seen, but like the Miller case, right? And we talk about these cases as lawyers sometimes, and we just throw these cites out. These are real people, right? And the Miller case and all of the cases, we have to look at the appellate court and who the panel was and whomever and how we got to where we got, okay? So Miller was heinous. We get that. There was way more culpability, because I followed that case very closely when it happened, right? Way more culpability of just being there. But somebody still dead, right? So now we're here with this Miller case and the Miller factors. Let's talk about this case and why Prosecutor McDonald, at the end, she summed it up so succinctly. There has not been one mass killer, she says, that has been able to be rehabilitated. One, not one. So society, do we get protected ever? And like Mr. Buckmeyer said, we need to do better, and we are going to do better. But part of better is you got to do what you have to do. You chose this path. You said, you researched it. You said, hey, I'm going to do life. Well, okay, there you go.
All right, Lillian, Richard, and Terry, our thanks to you for helping us be able to bring this coverage to our viewers. And our coverage of the fate of the Oxford High School shooter will continue in later editions of CBS News Detroit Today. Again, Judge Rowe will be deciding on September 29th if the shooter should be sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. He will then be having a sentencing on December 8th.